Welcome to All Villa, No Filler. Remember to subscribe to the show. Follow us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. The futures of Joao Felix and Mario Hermoso are both up in the air. They've been linked heavily with Aston Villa. To get the latest, I'm joined by Ruairidh Barlow. He's editor at Football España. So, Ruairidh, great to chat to you again. Always love chatting football with you. What's the latest update on Joao Felix?
Yeah, pleasure to be back on. I think with Joao Felix, it's interesting because you're getting kind of conflicting reports. I mean, the latest in Portugal is that Villa are actually kind of cooling their interest, that they're looking to kind of pull out of any negotiations they're in. From that, you also kind of have the likes of Mateo Moreto, and who's quite well linked to Atletico Madrid as well. And he's saying that Unai Emery, at the very least, is still kind of dreaming of Joao Felix, where he feels like he would be kind of the cherry on top of his transfer window. So you're getting kind of conflicting reports with Joao Felix. I think we're not going to know really where he's going to end up until the last few weeks of the transfer window. It doesn't benefit any of the teams involved pursuing him to really move before Atleti get desperate to move him on.
Right. So, why are Atleti so desperate to get rid of him?
Essentially, they've just had a falling out. Diego Simeone and Joao Felix don't seem to really get on. Joao Felix and the fans certainly don't get on. He kind of pushed quite hard for a move to Barcelona last season, last summer that was, and then he played twice against them, scored twice against them, and didn't hold back in his celebration, shall we say. He was quite kind of adamant, and he's been pretty clear that he feels that his place is Barcelona as opposed to Atleti, and there's been kind of tensions for some time. I mean, I think you've seen kind of bits and bobs of it come to the fore, but he's back in training now. But certainly the word is that he didn't really want to be back in training, and Atleti would have been perfectly happy if he'd found a home before he came back from the Euros.
So yeah, he joined Atleti a few years ago now for an absolutely astronomical fee, over 100 million euros. Um, Obviously, he was on loan at Barcelona last season. He was also on loan at Chelsea previously. How would you say he's performed in La Liga during his years there?
Yeah, there's different kind of stages. So I think as he comes into Atleti, he's doing reasonably well. You're seeing bits and bobs, you're seeing promise from him, but he always seems to get kind of caught up in some sort of run or rut or injuries that kind of prevent him having the season that you'd quite like. So you have that kind of initial season, that's fair enough. That's him adapting and Diego Simeone trying to introduce him to his kind of methods. Then you kind of have a couple of seasons where Felix gets injured at the wrong time. He kind of drops out of form. He's not being productive. He'll have runs where he's very good, but not necessarily kind of the star man for Atleti. And then, yeah, the season where I think they won the league, he really became kind of a secondary figure in 2021. And that more or less, I think, kind of set the tone in terms of how he was regarded at Atleti, that he wasn't necessarily going to be the guy for them, even as much as they would have liked him to be. And you get as well kind of the internal politics. I think the leadership at Atletico Madrid still either through blind faith or just hope that he kind of becomes this kind of superstar. Whereas Diego Simeone, I think, made up his mind on him quite a long time ago. And then as far as last season goes, he wasn't actually unproductive in his minutes. So you look at his figures and he kind of averaged goal contribution every 140, 150 minutes. So he was kind of contributing when he was on the pitch. But again, he gets kind of 6 months into the season. He starts off really brightly for Barcelona, scores a few goals. And then by the time January comes around, Xavi has dropped him and he's back on the bench again. And that is ultimately the consistent theme because we saw that at Chelsea as well.
Yeah, you know, what sort of position does he also play in generally? Because when I've looked into him, I've kind of never quite worked out what his best role is. And I know at Barcelona he tended to be out wide as well, but he also plays centrally for Atleti. So where is his best position, would you say?
It's a good question. I mean, some people say 10, some people say kind of up front. I think I would be inclined to play him off a striker. And I think if you look at kind of the way that most teams play, I think that's part of his problem is that he probably plays off a kind of more dominant number nine. And okay, Aston Villa kind of have that in Ollie Watkins, but you look at a lot of the teams that play around them, and not many teams are playing 4-4-2. They're not playing with kind of two out and out strikers and giving somebody the freedom to roam. And ultimately, Felix if he is to become the player that he needs to be to play in that role, he has to be productive. And so far, he hasn't quite shown that efficiency in front of goal or in terms of providing assists to be able to give him that role, to be given that role just off a striker. So yeah, with Felix, it's kind of difficult because he doesn't necessarily have a natural role, I'd say, in the majority of schemes that managers are playing right now.
Right. And what kind of a fee and wages as well would he command?
So the latest was, and there's a bit of kind of hookery over this because he's extended his contract twice with Atleti now to go on loan and kind of reduce the impact on their books. So I think the latest is that his wages are about 8 million per season. So that's quite substantial for Atleti. Their line has always been that they'll demand his amortization plus his wages. So you're looking at any deal is going to be costing you about kind of 15 to 20 million at least if you're going to meet Atleti's demands. But as we say, Atleti are not in a position of strength. They're not really in a position to call the shots because they have such a large wage on their books. A player that for Simeone isn't necessarily going to count much. He's going to start off with the fans on his back. So it's in their interest to shift him. It's just how much they're willing to give up. And I think with Joao Felix, again, the key issue is how long is he willing to wait for Barcelona? Because he went right until the last day last season to get the deal done. Will he do that again if Barcelona sign another kind of left winger, which seems to be the priority this summer? Then that makes a bit of a difference. But if they do kind of keep that role vacant or they don't bring anyone in, then I think the likes of Benfica and Villa, who've been linked as competition, then they probably face an uphill struggle to get this done before the last week of the transfer window, to be honest.
Okay, and Unai Emery does have a track record of working with players who sometimes rough diamonds, but others maybe who are seen as very high level talents, but maybe haven't reached the levels that people think they could. So, do you think Felix, this could be the best move for him to work with Unai Emery?
I'll be honest, I was quite shocked that Unai Emery and Villa were linked with Felix because as much as Emery has a record of kind of repurposing or kind of getting the best out of players that haven't necessarily done it or haven't reached the heights that they'd have liked to at other clubs, Emery has kind of a pretty consistent record of always having hard-working players up front. He likes defensive discipline. He likes to be able to counter-attack, and he likes his teams to be solid off the ball. Felix is the exact polar opposite of that. Is his biggest kind of I think he might have stuck around in the Barcelona team last season if he had had the defensive work rate, if he'd been positionally sound. But he just doesn't have that concentration, whether it's a lack of desire. I don't like to accuse players of that, or just a kind of lack of mindset in the terms of you've got Diego Simeone there as well, who again another manager who off the ball is as good as it gets in terms of world football, but hasn't managed to bring that out of Joao Felix. And so if you do play him anywhere that isn't up front, then you're asking him automatically to be tracking a fullback, tracking a midfielder, and that's not something he's shown he can do. And I think that's why he ended up dropping out of the Barcelona team last season too.
Right, very interesting stuff about Joao Felix, and we'll certainly hear more of that, I'm sure, in the coming weeks. Just a quick one as well on Mario Hermoso, another player who's been linked with Aston Villa, a former Atleti defender. He left there on a free and doesn't yet seem to have a club that I'm aware of that he's close to joining. What's the latest on him?
Yeah, it's a curious one. He's been linked with Bologna in Italy. They say that he's been kind of surfaced as an option for them. They're obviously going into the Champions League, so they'll be trying to make a kind of few bigger splashes in the transfer market. But it's been very quiet on the Hermoso front, and an illustration of that is that he was linked with a return back to Atleti, and I mean that was strenuously denied from kind of the Spanish side of things. But yeah, it's been very quiet for Hermoso. I assume he probably has offers to go to the Middle East if he wants to. I think he's probably waiting to see how a few situations shake out. But again, with Villa, I'd say if I mean, you'll have kind of a better insight as to how they've been working in the transfer market and what they've been prioritizing. But given he's been a free agent for that long, you'd kind of assume that if Villa wanted to get this done, it would have been done by now, or at least kind of been a little bit more chatter. There would have been a bit more effort from the agent to rustle up some interest by saying at least, okay, we have this in place with Villa. If you want him, you come get him. So having not seen that, I think he's probably just waiting until kind of the final few weeks as well, just to see what kind of lands at his door. Maybe that Bologna interest does turn into something a bit more concrete.
Yeah, and they have just lost Calafiori, I think his name is,
Yep.
to Arsenal, so that would make a bit of sense actually. Although there was a bit, I think he liked a Instagram post associated with Aston Villa last week as well, Hermoso. So I think that got a bit of gossip going, but he has been linked with us for quite a while. And I guess just one or two quick questions on him is, how similar in style is he to Pau Torres? Because I know he's a left centre back and can play at left back as well. So would he be a good alternative option to Pau Torres?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Pau Torres is ahead of Hermoso in my view, but certainly Hermoso's main skill is kind of on the ball, stepping into midfield, which is something that Pau Torres does very, very well. And Hermoso, he's kind of an acquired taste, but I think if you look at most of the successful Atleti teams over the last kind of 3, 4 years in terms of when they've been good, when they've gone on solid runs, when they've looked like they can challenge, it's been with Hermoso in defense and it's been with him kind of playing a leading role. The way that Simeone has spoken about him, even kind of knowing that he's going to be gone at the end of the season, I think that's a positive sign because he spoke quite kindly of him and had some good words for him. So yeah, I think Hermoso, he's always going to be a little bit shakier defensively than you'd like. But then I would have probably said the same about Pau Torres before he moved to Villa as well. So I feel like, again, Unai Emery system, he makes everything better in terms of what you're doing off the ball, and also might fit quite well into that.
And he does play at left back as well as centre back.
Less so. I don't particularly like him at left back. I've seen him against kind of the likes of Rodrigo, Vinicius, that kind of thing, at left back, and you don't really necessarily want him being pulled out wide to the byline. He can do it if he needs to, and depending on what kind of, yeah, again, what kind of system you're playing, how much ground he's being asked to cover in terms of space, that's a bit different. But yes, he can do it. Certainly, I think if you're looking at it from a Monchi point of view more, you say yes, he can cover left back and he can play in the middle of defense as well, but wouldn't be my preference. That's just me.
Okay. And just as a final question, do you think Hermoso could suit the Premier League?
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, with all kind of the recruits that go from La Liga, you kind of look at two key things. One of them is space, is that there's more space in the Premier League, so you've got more of that to exploit, especially for the attacking players, and physicality, whereas the Premier League is a lot more physical, it's a lot faster paced, and so you ask, can Hermoso hold up to that? I think so. He probably can. Again, kind of, I always liked him best at Atleti when he was in a three or at least in the kind of a back four with a more defensive left back. So I don't think you necessarily want to expose him with a really high line, but is Emery going to do that? Probably not too often. And yeah, I think he has that kind of ability on the ball to make him really useful because he is very skilled at kind of sliding those balls through midfield, working out, okay, have I got a gap? How far can I get with this ball before I give it off? That kind of thing. That's where he kind of excels. And so yeah, I think he would suit the Premier League.
Okay, brilliant. Well, Rory, I absolutely love chatting football with you. I could sit here for 24 hours asking you questions about La Liga. I absolutely could. But for those who don't know where they can find you and your work, where can they find it?
Yeah, Football España at footballespaña.net is the website. That's where we'll be kind of doing our exhaustive coverage of Spanish football. We'll be doing analysis pieces. We've got a really good column as well. And at Ruairidh Barlow on Twitter, RuiBarlow is where you'll find me, and I'll probably be promoting the ones that I do, plus some other really good ones.